Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Bussey. I'm the Key Relationship Manager, and I'm so glad that you joined us today for our webinar, Toxic Employees When Conflict Can't Be Resolved. We're going to be talking today about how we find those people, really, and how to really walk through. We've attempted everything, we're moving forward with it, but where do we go from here? They just don't want to be a part of it. And before we begin, I want to direct your attention to the icon at the top. Go ahead, raise your hand if you can hear me. Also, if you agree or disagree with something I say, let me know. If you need me to speak a little louder or speak a little softer, speed up or slow down. And of course, laughter and applause is always appreciated. As always, our Lunch and Learn webinars are recorded and added to our YouTube channel. So if you don't follow us on social media, go ahead and follow us on our LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter pages. You'll receive notifications as well as the recording will be available next week. So let's go ahead. Oh, we're hearing some crazy elevator music. Thank you for sharing. We're working on that. I have Carrie Bennett here with me, and she is our marketing guru. She's going to be helping with the technical aspects, as well as really looking at where we're going to go. If you have any questions, please don't wait till the end. Go ahead and type them in the chat box. We'll address them. I want this webinar to be for you. Where do we want to go with this? I'm going to ask some pointed questions. This is a safe place. Please go ahead and share. Know that we're going to discuss it in generalities, but today is all about sharing with each other. I think it's very interesting that as we are talking about this, the first question I want to ask you is, do you ever have or ever had a negative employee that you avoid? Like just straight up, oh, I see him coming, I'm on the phone now. Go ahead in the left-hand box and say yes or no, and then tell us why you avoid them. Because overall, we are here together. We had the poll in our lobby, and you really started about rating yourself, about are you going above and beyond to make sure that we as leaders have done everything. And 66% of the attendees think that we've done okay. There's a 8%, yeah, we've gone above and beyond. We're really ready to just move forward with it. But overall, the attendees, as I said, that today we're in a safe place. 66%, I've done okay. 25%, I have someone who's difficult. I need help. Please help me. And as you can see with our poll, 84% have said yes, have had a negative employee that I've avoided. I will admit I am part of that it keeps rising, 85%. And why are we avoiding them? Well, we see constant complaining about everything. They're the office complainer. They bring down your morale, ruin your day. They're not under my direct supervision. Sometimes we see it, but well, I can't control it, so I'm just going to avoid it. Love that. We're seeing some common themes: complainers, defensive. Something went wrong, but they're the dreaded blame shifter. It's never their fault. I'm trying to be positive, and so if for me to stay positive, I just can't be around that person. John Gordon calls them the energy vampires. They will suck the life straight out of you. And so you just feel that whenever you're around them, there's nothing that's ever right. And so as people, we tend to avoid them because we don't want that negativity to drag us down, the complaints, especially if we feel like we sometimes kind of fall into that as well. However, the difficulty as leaders, and I want to speak from a leadership aspect for a moment, as leaders, by avoiding that negative person, we are allowing that toxicity to grow and to infect the rest of the team. As leaders, we drive the bus. And so our direct reports, the other people in the office, recognize, oh, have you seen, when was the last time that Kim talked with Carrie? She is constantly avoiding her. Well, it must be okay for me to avoid them. Not to mention, we're letting that employee down. As leaders, we have to really work to motivate them. And yes, it is draining to deal with a negative person. It's draining when we feel like we're pouring in all of our efforts and we're coaching and we're giving them the tools and the discussions and the resources that they need. And yet we can't have them take the initiative to help themselves. We all have those people we want to avoid. However, regardless of your leadership style, regardless of what your natural behavioral traits are when you lead, whether you are that person who's like, let's just address this conflict right away and move on, or you're that person who's like, you know what, let's just see if it goes away on its own. It never really goes away. And what I found really interesting in the second poll that we did about where your toxic employees are, 34% said they were your high performers. 61% said they were the average performers. But the point that shocked me was that zero were below average performers. Well, that gives me a little bit of hope in that when we talk about this, as we're setting that foundation about where those cores lie and how we can maximize our time and really work with them to ensure that the conflict can't be resolved. And if it can't, then we're going to talk about some steps to put into place to begin to create an exit strategy. But what I want first is to say, ask yourself, and you don't have to reply, but really take a second for that self-reflection and ask yourself, have I done everything to identify the source of the conflict and to resolve it? As leaders, we have to be that person. And if we don't know how, well, we've got Omnia's got some tools for you that can help it. But to uncover what our challenge is when we're negotiating that and to move forward. Maybe it's from that point of we're not quite sure they're top performers and we want to keep them and keep them happy, and where to move forward with that. And we've got our first question. What happens when they're just not personally happy? They may be that person who's just doesn't seem to be happy. There's two different ways to coach it. One is it's situational and that we leave our personal life at home, or if it's truly who permeates their thoughts and their core, then what you have to say is, does that align with the core values of the company and the culture? And it's all about setting expectations, because we can't decide whether the conflict can be resolved or we're working on an exit strategy if we haven't set the expectations of what is and is not acceptable within the workplace. Because a report by Cornerstone says that good employees are 54% more likely to quit when they work with a toxic employee. 54%. There is some truth with the old adage, one bad apple spoils the whole barrel. You have one person who comes in and is unhappy and not demotivating and doesn't want to be there. And they could be around those core performers, the average employee who they're like, oh, yeah, I can see that. I'm right there with it. What are we doing with it? And bringing them to the dark side, so to speak. And then there's those others that are just driving the business and they're happy and they're where they want to be. As leaders, we have to decide that, because let me ask you, can you handle having constant turnover within your company? So take away what it does for morale, take away what it does for the lack of productivity and that constant going back and forth within it. But as a company, can you accept the hard cost of losing good employees, or employees that can be coached to be top performers because of one toxic person? The average cost of a bad hire can be up to 1 to 1.5 times their annual salary. If we as leaders don't want to address it, we don't recognize it, don't address it, don't decide how to do it, and what is that ending point, then we're not going to be able to stop that lack of productivity. We're not going to be able to increase our revenue. It all plays into part. So let me ask you this. Typically, true or false, typically 80% of your problem or conflicts come from 20% of your employees. And if you agree with it or don't agree with it, let's just ask, how do you identify that 20% employee? So is it because they're missing performance goals? Is it because of negativity? Maybe they're just disengaged or attendance issues? Is it all of the above? Or maybe it's something other. What is your measuring stick, your thermometer, so to speak, of that toxicity, that toxic employee? And how do we measure whether they're good or bad? And you're absolutely correct. For those of you who have answered, true. Typically, 80% of your problems comes from 20% of your employees. And think about that. If we're 80% comes from 20%, how much of your time during the week is spent dealing with those problems? Say at the minimum you work a 40-hour a week and you spend 8 hours a week, say 20% dealing with those problems. It's probably closer to 40 or 50. That's 8 hours a week that you're dealing with these issues. What else could you be doing for those 8 hours? Could you be coaching your performers who are working? Can you be who are average? Can you be going out and driving the business yourself? Could you be looking at succession planning? And overall, how you identify that is all of the above. It's interesting though, missing performance goals typically isn't that measuring stick. And it ties right back into your high performers or even your average performers who are just meeting those goals are okay. But we don't want okay. I don't know of anybody who wakes up and says, today I want an okay day at work. I want to make okay sales. I want to make okay productivity. I want to be an okay manager. We are mostly hardwired to say, no, more. We want to be the best. That's the culture. We don't want to be mediocre. We don't want to be okay. We want to be the best that we can be and drive that business. So let's talk about the core concept a little bit, because this is the foundation of really uncovering that toxic employee as well as where that conflict is coming. Remember, I said ask yourself, have I really identified the source of the conflict? And then, have I truly, truly coached for this? So there is a Pareto principle out there. It's the 80-20. It says 80% of the work is driven by 20% of the people. Or, in this case, 80% of conflict is typically driven by 20% of the people. And all of your employees, your entire team falls into 3 areas. That's what we call the core concept. You're going to have those people who are your top performers, those core people. You're going to have the developers and then the underperformers. Well, a lot of times as leaders, but raise your hand, how many of you spend the majority of your time working with your core performers? Think of it as your top performers. They're great. You want to make sure that they stay happy, because as long as they stay happy, you're happy. So let me see your hands on an average that you say on an average day. I'm going to make sure I talk to my top performers. Okay, I've got a couple. Now raise your hand if you spend most of your time dealing with those underperformers. They're not meeting their goals. Taking out that toxicity, but they're not meeting their goals. They've got a lot of questions. They're just not there, whether it's revenue generating or service generating. Okay, so I see hands popping up all over the place. See where we're kind of falling into this? So we've got 20% who's really that core, those driving the business. We've got 20% who's dragging the business down. But what about the 60% for those developers? How many of you spend the majority of your day talking and working with those people on your team who are average, for lack of a better, they meet their goal the most of the time. Sometimes I have some people who come are meat and potatoes. They're steady eddies. They're coming in. They do their job. They know what they need to do, and then they kind of leave. But how many of you spend the majority of your day, or even 80% of your day, or 20% of your day, working with those developers? I'm seeing a couple of hands being raised. So let's put that into perspective. 61% of your toxic employees are generating from that developers group, which makes up 60% of your work, of your team. So doesn't it make more sense to concentrate on that area to really uncover the source of why that negativity could be breeding? Yes, you're going to have those people. Those are the top, that they're core, that they're the top performers who could be a little bit more of those divas. I drive the business. If I leave, the company's going to go down. Rarely is that the case. And we do have to deal with that. And that's a whole different conversation that we'll talk about. But really think about that. Your problems are coming from the 60% that isn't talked to and developed on a daily basis. What a difference could it make if we could move those developers from that 60% and just transition them a little bit? If we could take one or two of them and slowly move them into the course and start setting our standards and expectations to a level where we expect them to hit and we're consistently holding them accountable. So let's explore a little bit. So why is the core, those top performers, truly the top performers? Well, some of the things that they have is they've got that energy, they're knowledgeable, they're dependable, they've got experience, they're focused, they're helpful. They are in the right position behaviorally. So think of it this way. I'm a salesperson. By trade, that's what we do at Omnia, is really uncover what behavioral traits really fit in the position. For me, I have a leadership salesperson ideal graph, so to speak. And so one of the things that make me so successful at that is I like people, but I'm goal driven and I'm assertive, and I hear no and I'm thinking, oh, that just means not yet. Let me think outside the box. If you put me into a role where I was having to strictly work service, where it are number crunching or accounting, where I had to sit in an office by myself, head down, working on spreadsheets, looking at, not talking with people, making sure every I is dotted, every T is crossed, would not do well. I may be the right person for your company in the wrong seat. And do you think I would eventually become a little bit negative? Probably, because it's not a good fit for me. But if you put me into a role where I feel passionate about that, I feel like, okay, I'm using my skills and my expertise and my knowledge in a way that's going to help the company, then you may see some of that. So as we talk about this, what I want you to think about is, if I said, who's your number one who is that toxic employee? So if I say, name your toxic employee, everyone either had a name or a face pop in front of their head, right? Whether you admit it or not, you're like, oh, that's so and so and so. Think about how evenly matched they are to that position. Maybe their toxic behaviors are coming from that they're on the right bus but the wrong seat. Or it could come from the fact that they're in the right seat, wrong bus. But we've got to look at it, and we've got to look at it objectively and factually. So the developers, let's talk about that. That's 60%, 60% of your team, 60%, 61% of where your toxic employees are. It's a little overwhelming. But what makes them that developer? Well, they tend to be a little bit dependable. They may be full of energy. They're typically a little bit more helpful, honest, But two key points that are missing is typically experienced and knowledgeable. And think of it this way, and that can apply even if someone's been with your company for years, but they've transferred to a new position. You're so great at what you do, Carrie. We're going to promote you to someone, to a team of 10 people. I have no experience managing, and I'm not even sure what this team does. That negativity is going to start breeding. Or you have those, developers who are just happy where they are. And so you're thinking, well, they're happy. How do I coach them? How do I keep them engaged? It's growing their knowledge. Another reason why we tend to see about 60% of those toxic employees sitting here as the developers is because there is a lack of desire to advance in professional growth. They have a tendency to sit back and say, I've been here for 10 years. I've seen people come and go. I know what I need to do. This is who I am. Everyone deal with it. Has anyone agree or disagree? Has anyone experienced that? And it makes it even worse if it's a long-term, thank you, I'm not alone. It makes it even worse when it's someone that, in an environment where you're trying to change the culture. A lot of our insurance, we're seeing a lot of the insurance industries where people are going from a strictly service to some cross-selling, and now their long-term employees are like, you want me to sell? I don't sell. I service the account. I'm not a producer. Recognizing what that core conflict is coming from. Is it a lack of education? Is it a lack of desire? Is it a lack of knowledge? Allows you to really start implementing that strategic plan. Because we really want to make sure that it is a team effort to say, I'm going to provide you what you need. However, you have to want to grab hold of it. And then let's just touch base on those underperformers. They are so much easier to recognize, right? They're just kind of here. They may or may not be knowledgeable. Yeah, I'll take care of that project, but I really won't. And that's where that not honest, maybe sometimes they just flat out lie. They could have experience, but they're just they're here. They tend to be those actively disengaged employees. And with those actively disengaged employees is they're here, they're collecting their paycheck, but they're looking to leave. Now, is it easier to move people up from the developer to the core than it is to take the underperformer to the core? Absolutely. But once again, you may not necessarily want to write off that underperformer. If you could take them from underperforming, set those expectations, and move them to a developer or to that average employee, now you've increased that a little bit and you can slowly work their way up. A lot of times, and we even said that the majority of our time is spent with those low performers. It's typically because they make the most errors, or we feel like that we're always that firefighter who's putting out the latest crisis fire that they've created. We have to hold them accountable, but we have to make sure, do they have the knowledge? And it's not just necessarily head knowledge, but it's how application. How do I take it from the head to apply it to this world? By understanding that, that's setting you up for success when you begin to address this chronic toxic employee, this chronic conflict that's happening, whether it's between you and them, or between you, them, and their peers, or between everything else. It's key to really diagnose the disease that we call disengage-itis. It's almost a mouthful, right? Disengage-itis. So when we look at that, we have to say, one, is it environmental? Once again, regardless of where they are they unhappy in their role? Is it their peers? Maybe I don't get along with the people I work with. Maybe management. I get along with a great manager, but then I have this other manager who's out there who we just don't, we communicate differently. They're a problem solver. And every time I take something to them, they tell me what I did wrong, and I really need to be recognized for the effort. Or I need more details. My manager just gives me the highlights and I can't do my job because you haven't told me. So some of that is behavioral. That has the culture change. Remember, we're looking at what is the source of this conflict. Because when that happens, what we may see for those toxic employees is they say stuff like, I don't want to, not going to do it, can't make me, I have no desire, not doing it. Or we may see, I can't. Well, sometimes I can't, and that toxic and negativity that's generating from I can't do it, it translates into I don't know how, I'm not capable, or I'm not confident enough to do it. We all move at different paces. Some of us are fast paced and pick up items very quickly and talk and ideas. Others of us want to be methodical and tell me all the steps. And so when I say I can, I truly can't. There's a difference between I can't and a blame shifter of I don't know how to. As a leader, we have to really find out, is it truly I can't or I don't want to? But sometimes it's I'm too valuable. Those long-term employees who've been with you for years. How many of you, by show of hands, have people on your team that's been with you for 5 years or more? So typically so I'm seeing hands come up. Okay, how about 10 years? Any of you have employees who have 10 years of 10 years or more? So we're still great group. What about 15 years or more? So we're seeing a couple of hands. You got, oh my goodness, the attendees have lots of long tenured employees, which is great. Our average tenure here um, has been, for Omnia is 10 to 15 years. It's actually gone down a little bit because we've had a couple of people retire, but we've been in business for 31 years and have actually had employees here 25, 26, 27 years of that. With that long-term tenure, there has a tendency to come into place of I'm too valuable. I've walked the walk. We've gone through the good times together. We've gone through the bad times together. Now we're a part of the family, right? Because we all know you've been together 10 plus years, 15 plus years. I know you. I've seen your children grow up, whether it's in person because we've got that family culture or through the pictures on your desk. Now I'm okay as an employee to be a little bit more negative and to be a little bit more toxic because I've got more knowledge in my head about the business than people have been alive. Or you'll never find someone who can just jump in and take my place because I can't download 20 years. If I walk out of here today, you're in trouble. Well, you may be. Let me just address that. They may be right, but is it a temporary trouble? And is that trouble something that can't be overcome? This is why I highly, highly recommend that you have handbooks, you have guidelines, you have policies and procedures. Because, God forbid something happen, and that valuable person who has it in their head, that this integral piece of knowledge, and something happens to them and they don't come in, whether they walk away or you decide that, their negativity, we just can't deal with it anymore. We've given them the guidelines, we've set the expectations, we've walked through all of the facts, and now they're gone. You need to have something in writing. You need to have that recipe book. Are the other thing for disengageitis, which is what you typically hear from the producers, and many times from those revenue generating positions, is I'm a high producer. I brought in $500,000 in sales last year. I brought in $50,000 in sales last year. I bring in 10% of all of the work. So you know what? I think that you give me what I want, because if I walk, I'm taking my clients with you, and what are you going to do about it then? Well, a lot of times it helps to have to avoid that is to make sure that you have a well-rounded team that comes around that producer. You want to have multiple touch points, whether it's the producer as well as service personnel our customer service, or even as the owner, if it's your top 10 clients, you should know who they are. Talk with them. Begin to give additional touch points. The other thing is that really to set it and say, is the revenue worth me losing other people? Going right back to 54% of people say that they leave because of toxic employees. You have to have a consistent standard. Yes, it may be a little bit different, and there are always those outlying events, but what is the consistent standard of how we're going to treat each other and build that culture? And you can't go through, you can't, if they say they go through the handbook and say, I don't know, then that's when you really say, let's put some continuous education. Some people learn better by reading, some people learn better by doing or having some of those training, but it's creating that performance improvement plan that's going to help you. So if it's that high producer, ask yourself, that high performer, what do I have in place to protect these clients if they decide to leave? Multiple points of contact. Is setting that foundation. One, it's great customer service because sometimes that performer is out of the office and you want them to take their time off so they don't get burnt out, but you are also giving them that area. And we have some great questions coming up, and it leads directly into where we're going with this. So once you've identified really what's the source of conflict, is it situational, is it organizational? It may be that there's something personal going on in their life and it's a temporary status. They're going through the stress of marriage. There's been a family loss of a family member. They're going through a divorce and they're having difficult times leaving it at home. You can still address their behaviors at work, but you may say, okay, I know this is situational. I'm going to address it so that we can move past it. Or you identify the source is the person. We've talked about everything, and this is just who they are. And that's when you have to say, okay, they're not a great fit for this culture. What do I do? Well, the first thing you do is you set the stage. And when we talk about that, this is when you begin to lay that foundation of, we've talked about this conflict. I know who I am. Here's where I want to go through this. And now let's begin. First thing is set a neutral environment. If you do not have expectations for the entire company, then you need to have it. And that may be something that as a group you say, we are now instituting the following. We're going to have weekly one-on-ones. We're going to have quarterly one-on-ones. I want to hear your voice. Or this is what our culture is. These are what our core values are. And let's talk about it. This is especially key if you're going through some organizational changes, that neutral environment, that one-on-one. If you have those expectations in place, then that's when you need to say, okay, I'm having a problem. Carrie, there's some issues here. Let's schedule a time. I want to sit and talk. Doing it in that neutral environment may help. Maybe you go for a walking meeting where you're walking outside if you're both active, or you go to Starbucks. Bringing them into the office, sitting across a desk, or especially if it's an open floor plan where there's not a lot of privacy, or if you expect there to be some loud discussion, not necessarily on your point, but a lot of times we do have those toxic employees who feel like the louder that they get, the more that their voice will be heard. So by having it in a neutral area, that's going to eliminate some of that. Having that scheduled time, and then prepare. What we mean by that is you want to prepare emotionally, situationally, and factually. So the emotional part is if there's that toxic employee, and sometimes we allow things to build and build and build and build and build, and all of a sudden it's like this whole, exactly, you're all fired. I want to just go through it. You have to really say, one, am I in the emotional stage to address this calmly, clearly, and concisely? Two, situationally, what what's the situation? Is it a one-time thing? Is it something that's happening repeatedly? And if it is situational, how bad was the initial situation? So I've talked to you, we're in a group meeting and you become disrespectful and rude and yell at the entire team or yell at the supervisor in front of them. That's an immediate situational to say, okay, that's unacceptable. It won't be tolerated. We're going to document it, whether it is just a quick email, whether it's a true documentation of this is a verbal warning, so that you have that information. And then when you prepare factually, once again, take the emotions out of it to say, on May 12th, 2016, we had a team meeting where we walked through expectations in the beginning. Maybe you have a document that says that they've acknowledged it. You signed this on May 16th. The following items happened. Boom, boom, boom. This is, why it's in violation. This is why it's unacceptable. By keeping it factual, especially in writing, and I cannot stress this enough, if you put anything in writing, it must be strictly the facts, because if it goes in an HR file, it could be subpoenaed if it goes to legal action. Typically, it doesn't advance that far, but you want to make sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. By setting this example and setting these expectations across the board, it kind of levels that playing field. And I see that there's some people that holding people accountable if they haven't been held accountable before. And it's tough as a leader to have that. Like, I've seen this going on for 5 years. Now I'm your leader, and the resistance just grows because they're testing those boundaries. Are you still going to let me do this? Why was it acceptable for 5 years and now it's not? Stay the course and communicate appropriately. You may even say, this is the new direction that we're going in. This is what we want to do moving forward. What was acceptable in the past, business has changed, so we're changing the direction of where we're going. If you have something signed by the staff, if it's a handbook, if it's something that you're acknowledging the new company expectations or core values, if you have it signed by one, you do need to have it signed by everyone. Once again, and I would encourage you to talk to, because I know we have attendees from across the country, talk to your HR team, talk to your, if you do not have one, to an attorney that specializes in employee law, just to verify your state law to make sure that you're consistent and within your state guidelines as well. We're here at Florida, so I do know that we typically we hold fast to the consistency to make sure if it's consistent, unless it's a performance improvement plan. If it's something that's personal, you don't need to have everyone sign it. But if it is something that you are setting in place to the entire team, it's a good idea. Once again, so for a couple of reasons. One, okay, so Susie wasn't at the meeting. She was on vacation. And so I need to follow up with her and have this conversation and have her sign it. If someone's out, you want to make sure that you are giving a consistent message, not just, hey, you missed the meeting, read this and get back with me. Set that expectation of why we're doing this, how it's going to benefit the team as well as the company and client business. So tie it in kind of the what's in it for me factor. And then you want to present it very positively as well. Like, this is a good change. It's going to help eliminate some of the conflict. It's going to help us be better prepared to work as a team moving into this new strategic plan. Not like, you stink and we're having issues with this, this, and this, and so get it together or you're all going to be fired. Absolutely. Huge, huge, huge demotivator for that. So be very careful of that. But once again, make sure that it also comes from what's going on. If you're conducting those one-on-ones, I meet with my team on a quarterly basis one-on-one, and we have a lot of informal conversations. But if it's something that needs to be addressed, I make notes about it just so that I know, okay, what am I following up on? If it's something that needs to be addressed immediately, then I still make those notes just so that we can be on the same page. Also helps me be a better leader with that consistency. Am I truly following up with them? As you're communicating, you want to do a couple of different things. One, you want to walk into it with the right attitude, right? So, where are we? What are we doing? It's an us together versus a me against you. You want to use those facts and not feelings. Prepare mentally. So, try to have these conversations on a day or time of day when you're not rushed. You don't want to start a team meeting or a one on one conversation where it is, I've got to move forward with, I've got 15 minutes to have this conversation. Now you're rushing through it. Or okay, if I don't set a time frame, this is going to go on for 2 hours. Prepare mentally. Know who you're meeting with. We have 30 minutes. We have an hour to discuss this. And then state your clear expectations with the next steps. So this is more starting along the lines after you've set the expectation for the team. Now you have that toxic employee who's not going to comply. And if it's a chronically toxic employee who doesn't comply with anything, you're already mentally prepared to say, okay, we're going to have some additional one-on-one conversations. Refer back to it. Say, this is the situation. In our meeting, you were loud and disruptive and argumentative, and this is how this played out. Boom, boom, boom. Here is what I expect. By giving them those facts and those examples, a lot of times people will go, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that, or I need some additional coaching on it. Work with them together about it. As we do that, then we can start creating those next steps. And with those next steps, it's really saying, here's, as a company, what is and isn't acceptable. What are the time frames for improvement? And those time frames are very, very, very important for accountability. And that accountability goes right back to whether it's a direct report to you or if you manage multiple levels and that supervisor is not holding their team accountable. So if let's talk about this for a moment. So if you have a multi-layer management and you've met with the team, the company, and said, these are our expectations. Or you meet with the management team and say, these are the expectations. I need you to convey it with your team. We're going to do a town hall meeting where we're going to talk to everybody and you need to follow up with them. If you have a supervisor who is not holding them accountable to the company expectations, here's where it's going to cause issues. They're creating either a team of many toxic employees who are going to kind of become that clique and, for lack of a better word, this unit of toxic that, well, the rules apply to everything but us because my manager says we don't have to do it. Or then you're going to have those people who want to comply and they feel the disconnect and now they're having issues with their direct supervisor. As the manager, you have to hold the supervisors, the managers at the same level or sometimes even higher than you do employees without that leadership title because their direct reports will follow their actions. So if there's a supervisor who is that problem, you hold them to that same accountability. You bring them in and you say, this is what the problem is. Here's what we see. This is where it's not acceptable. This is where we expect to see improvement, and let's move forward. And then talk to them as well as what are some of the tools? Maybe they don't know how to lead. The very common problem is to promote people because they do a great job. We see this all the time across industries within our world. They were just dynamic. They were a great salesperson. And so we promoted them to our sales team and they're not doing well. Once again, it's maybe that they need some of that leadership training. So as you sit down there and talk with them, it's important. And as you're creating those next steps, ask them, what do you need? Where do you see yourself going? What can we do to assist you? One, by getting their buy-in and getting their information is going to allow them to take ownership. Because if I tell you, Jane, this is what you need to do to improve it. If you don't do it in the next 30 days, you're going to be documented on a written warning Then they're going to come back and say, well, I didn't know how to do, you told me to do this, but I didn't know how to do it. So now it's really not my fault. But if they come back and say, I'm struggling with I don't necessarily agree with this, and as a supervisor, I know I need to, I need some assistance with explaining it, or how do I handle this situation? Now you can partner together with them and say, tell me what you need to be coached on. I need to be coached on how to communicate. I just want to be liked by everyone. These were my peers, and now I'm their supervisor. How do I deal with that? Now you have an idea of what coaching. Maybe it's some online training. Maybe it's you send them to a class. You give them some of the webinars. You offer them some leadership development reports where they can say, this is their leadership style. Here's your challenges. Here's your strengths. Here's some action plans, and move forward with it. We do have this as a development action plan. It will be available for downloading, as well this presentation will be. But I always say, give this to our employees to say, what are some of those strengths that you have? For toxic employees, a lot of times we forget that they do have some positive traits, because their bad behaviors or their bad behaviors or behavioral traits are just overshadowing everything. But what are some of those strengths that they think that they have, that you think that they have, but really give this to your employee to say, here's what I want. It's almost like a self-appraisal. What strengths are you bringing to this job? What are some of the challenges? And then you can correlate to come together. What can I do to improve on these? And what are the resources that are needed? And then have them set goals. Now, this is 3, 6, 12 month, but you may say, you're going to be on probation for 90 days, and we need a 1, 3, these are the improvements that we need to see within 30 days. By that, you're offering an assistance. If they don't utilize any of it, then you can take that to the next step of how much do we want to keep this employee? There's this old saying that you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them to drink. So you give them the resources. You're partnering with them. Once again, it's an us. We believe in you. We value you. We've trained you. Here's what's keeping you from advancing. What can we do to help? And these are our expectations. If they don't utilize it, then that's the next conversation. Well, maybe you haven't reached your goals. You have this information. Now, you're not utilizing it. These same behaviors are happening. And once again, document it very factually. We had a discussion on May 1st. June 1st comes around. We discussed negativity in team meetings. June 1st, Kim disagreed, was yelling in the meeting, was insubordinate to her manager. And then you may take it to the point of, you're not going to be here any longer. And it's difficult, but we have to say it. Demotion? Probably not. You can have a conversation to say, do you really feel like this is the right place? And some people will say, yes, no, I don't want to be a supervisor. Let me go back to the right seat on the right bus. I was much happier. However, if you offer demotivation, have a perfect example of that. I have a friend who, at her previous employer, her direct supervisor was not doing their job. Everyone knew it, from the CEO down, and the CEO offered them a demotion, where it was from being supervisor of the entire team of 10 people to basically being their admin assistant, thinking that that person was just going to exit. And they took it. Did it remove the toxic energy? Absolutely not. So now you had someone who wasn't doing their job as a supervisor, was now reporting to the people that they supervised, and they were just mad. And they couldn't do the job anyway. So the people were having to do the same thing. It's not a good fit. If they're not good in their role and they're not saying, I don't want to be here, I would rather be back to where I was. I was happier. I felt like I had the tools. Then they're probably not a good fit for your company. And I'm going to, I've managed people for 20 plus years in different industries with business development, and it's tough because we know our employees. We get to connect with them a little bit on a personal level. We all know that people have families and jobs and bills to pay. Most of us aren't independently wealthy, so we're working for a reason, and it's sometimes difficult to remove those factors. But when we look at it with what are their expectations? How are they, is this temporary? Still going to address it, but may give a little bit more grace and mercy? Or is it this truly who they are, and we need to just say, this is not the culture or the company for you, and let's part ways? But you have to look at it with, I'm going to hold consistent accountability. I'm going to coach to the plan. I'm going to talk about it with how are we moving forward, and I'm going to hold you accountable. And if they will either be accountable, or they're going to either wait for you to say, okay, this isn't working, or a lot of times they'll go ahead and leave. It's a difficult transition. It's tough, especially if you have that employee that everyone is coming to you about, and you can't really say, well, yeah, I know Carrie's a problem, and I'm writing her up so she can be out of here soon. It's not going to, you can't say that. Um, but you can listen. And usually, if that person leaves, whether on their own or voluntary or involuntary, then you're going to feel that weight of that negativity and toxic taken out of the um, company. So coach to the plan, be consistent, clearly state those expectations, the goals, the priorities, observe the behavior, give immediate feedback. So if you see them improving, give them that feedback. What you want to make sure is that it's consistent improvement. We want to reinforce the positive, but if they're not doing the job consistently, then we need to address that as well as we're addressing and recognizing that success. So we don't want them to improve for 2 weeks and then go right back to it. We have to have that consistent improvement. As a leader, if you're recognizing it and giving them feedback and sometimes it's minor tweaks, they can move forward. And at the end of the day, there should be absolutely no surprises. So once again, that consistent coaching, you're going to have that frequent conversations. You're going to have your documentation in order. When we say don't forget the human factor, if someone slides once, after 6 months, give them some grace. But don't offer those bad options. I truly feel like the demotion, unless it's the employee's idea, it's not a good thing. And you may have some turnover issue, especially if you're a brand new manager on a team. The typical turnover when you have a new supervisor for a team is 25%. Sometimes it can be as high as 50%, especially if you come in holding people accountable that haven't had to be accountable before. It's difficult because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm losing people left and right, but it's typical. You're not alone, so it happens. And then hire slow and fire fast. I think that's the best thing that we can do is really let them know that as we're filling new positions, we have our wish list, we have our non-negotiables. You use behavioral assessments like the Omnia, you talk with people. It's really finding that right person who not only fits the role and the position and the skills, but the culture of the company and the department that's going to be key. And if they can't, if you're having issues, then start putting things in place. It may take over a little bit of time to really work through it, especially if you're documenting things appropriately. But stay the course. Be consistent. It's absolutely where it needs to be. And then just want to leave you with a final quote before we go to some Q&A is a quote by Ronald Reagan. It says, peace is not absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. We don't ever want to blow up our team, but we have to be willing to have those tough conversations, not only for that toxic employee that we may be writing off and we're avoiding them and they feel that avoidance. And then they just keep acting out because they're like, well, my manager doesn't like doing here. So go ahead, type in any questions. This has been great. I hope you found it beneficial. We do have some takeaways with the coaching companion that you saw, our presentation, and that personal improvement plan. We also have a special offer for those that attend for our regulars. We don't do this for everyone. We have a complimentary assessment. So we have some great development tools. Whether you're saying, okay, what kind of leader am I? Am I that leader that's addressing or avoiding conflict? Am I not communicating in the right way? Or I have this tough I have a difficult employee and I want to give them something to say, let's really start this conversation with those strengths and challenges, or even for acquisitions. Who are they? What are their strengths and challenges? In Jackie, you may even want to take a look at some of our past lunch and learns about, conflict, and organizational conflict is huge, um, where it's situational and how to go through that. But email me if you have some like to take our assessment. We'll get some information to make sure we connect you with the right information and talk about your toxic employee, and then we'll take care of that for you and talk to you about the report results. Thank you so much for all that you do, and for being willing to say, let me take a step and see how I can be a better manager, better leader. It's a tough, tough place to be sometimes when you have those existing employees and those toxic employees, especially if they're long term. But stay the course, be consistent, know you're not alone. Call me, email me. I'd be happy to talk with you as well. And then if you're like, well, what is this behavioral assessment? Tune in next month for our Lunch and Learn on June 9th, where we can talk about what behavioral insight really can do for you. And then I don't see any questions, but once again, thank you so much for being a part of our Lunch and Learn today. The personal improvement plan is in the takeaways. Those you can download as well. And have a wonderful day and a great weekend. Thank you.